This video is sponsored by Audiolab, manufacturers of the interconnects and speaker cables used by a British audiophile. For more information about these and their other products, please click the link in the description. I guess I'd describe myself as a bit of a hi-fi purist. That's despite having two systems in my home that are built around convenience. One is in my son's playroom and the other is in my bedroom. But I don't want lots of boxes and wires there. I just want something that everybody can turn on and play easily, but still sounds good. As for my main rig, well, that's a different story. There's very little concession made to anything that impacts on sound quality. I like the speakers to look nice. This is a living room at the end of the day, but I can live with lots of boxes and wires as long as it's in the pursuit of fidelity. There's quite a lot of money invested in all that gear, and separates do sound better than all-in-one boxes after a certain price point. But if I didn't want to spend as much, say around £1,000 on an amplifier, and I wasn't bothered about a lot of features or a lot of power, what would I go for? Well, it turns out that pickings are pretty slim, but I did find a couple of contenders. Dayens is a no-nonsense Serbian brand. Their standard Menuetto amplifier is also offered in a custom form, with significant component upgrades from Mundorf and WBT. I'll get into that later. As far as a purist approach goes, it doesn't come more extreme than NVA. Their AP20 is a limited edition amplifier that comes in 3 funky looking finishes. The internal components are unusually highly specified for a unit of this price. Are you curious as to how good these purist amplifiers with quality internal parts sound? I am, but let's take a look at the designs first. From the front, the Dayens Menuetto Custom looks identical to the standard amplifier that retails for £900. It's a half rack width unit with a folded steel chassis and acrylic front panel, but this upgraded unit costs £1,350. The power switch is centrally located. The chrome knob on the left adjusts the volume, whilst an identical knob on the right toggles between 4 inputs. Both dials have a nice resistance to them. A remote control is the only concession made to modern day convenience. It looks like it's been raided from the parts bin of an inexpensive DVD player though. Surely Dayens can do better than this. On the rear you get the first indication of where the extra money over the standard unit has gone. The speaker binding posts have been upgraded to WBT connectors, as have 2 of the 4 line level inputs. More significant upgrades are found on the inside. The standard volume control has been replaced for an Alps Blue Velvet. Input capacitors to Mundorf MCAP tinfoil capacitors and 2 15,000 microfarad Mundorf M Lytic capacitors for the power supply. According to the UK distributor, some selected resistors have also been upgraded. However, power remains unchanged over the standard model, with ratings of 50 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 70 watts per channel into 4 ohms. I'll get into the quirky looks in a minute, but I thought it was amusing that the NVA AP20 occupies a very similar footprint to the Dayens Menuetto. It's just that it's wide and shallow as opposed to narrow and deep. NVA clearly opted for striking colours on this limited edition series of the AP20. It retails for £1,200 directly off their website. The cast acrylic case is not a cost-cutting measure. It's manufactured by the same company that makes durable display cabinets for the British Museum. The reason why NVA use acrylic rather than metal casework is that they believe that the eddy currents that circulate in conductive casework negatively impact on sound quality. That's the same reason why adhesives rather than screws are used internally to secure components. NVA only provide features that are absolutely necessary for operation or sound quality. The lack of pandering means no remote control. All you get is a Japanese TKD volume control feeding a passive preamplifier stage and 4 inputs to select between. Essentially, the AP20 is a one-box version of the P50 preamp and S80 power amp that I reviewed back in March 2023, but with a beefed up power supply. It makes sense to keep cable lengths as short as possible between passive preamps and power amps due to potential signal loss. Having the passive preamp inside the same box as the power amp keeps the signal path as short as possible. The AP20 has a set of speaker binding posts that will only accept banana plugs. You guessed it, for sound quality reasons. There are also 4 RCA inputs and a tape output to connect recording devices. I can't open the top cover due to it being bonded, but NVA use very good quality parts, for example Vishay capacitors and toroidal transformers. The AP20 has a 120 VA transformer as opposed to an 80 VA found in the S80 power amp. That should help to provide a little extra drive. My impressions of these amplifiers were so heavily influenced by the speakers I paired with them and the levels that I played them at that I'll share with you a summary of my listening tests. I used my Audiolab Aries G1 streaming transport feeding my Denafrips Venus 2 DAC as a digital front end. £6 worth of source equipment is definitely overkill for amplification that retails a little north of £1,000, but at least there's no excuse for these amplifiers not to give their best. First up was the Dayens Menuetto custom amplifier, partnered with my current favourite sub £1,000 speakers. Monitor Audio Silver 107Gs are remarkably articulate speakers with good dynamics, but there is a bit of coolness to their presentation. There was no evidence of leanness with this pairing. The slightly rich tone of the Menuetto custom nicely balanced the sound. There was also plenty of detail. The compact 50 watt per channel Serbian amplifier kept the Silver 100's 8-inch mid-woofers under good control. I remember thinking at the time, this is a great start. Neutral, clean and dynamic. What more can you ask for from a system at this price? So I switched to the NVA AP20. I wondered whether 35 watts per channel would be enough to drive the monitor audios. Despite them having a minimum impedance of 4.9 ohms and an 87.5 dB sensitivity rating, they had been previously fairly easy to drive. The sheer levels of detail with soloists, although you had a couple of performers playing, was breathtaking. I mean, like nothing else that I've heard from a speaker amplifier combination at this price, but that was up to listening levels of around 70 decibels or below. Once you crank things up to around 80 decibels, it was clear that the AP20 was struggling a bit. For example, when you had bass lines, guitarists, vocalists and other instruments playing at the same time, there was some loss in composure. Overall, the Menuetto Custom was a better all-round option for the monitor audio speakers. So round one goes to the Dayens amplifier. I'm going to limit comparisons with my benchmark amplifiers to one for the sake of brevity. The Exposure 2510 is more expensive at £1,850, but the most likely amp in my arsenal to get cross-shopped, with the two amps being reviewed today. The 2510 delivered a very similar tone to the Menuetto Custom, but with a touch more detail and more impactful dynamics. The soundstage was also considerably wider with better instrument separation. It wasn't matching the NVA AP20 when it came to resolution with simply recorded stuff, but surpassed it when things got motoring. I can see a lot of people considering these amplifiers to pair with mini monitors in the near field or small rooms. The Dali Menuet SEs at £1,500 are the perfect speakers to test this scenario. With not much bass to deal with below 60 Hz and keeping listening levels to what I describe as not annoying other people in the house, I'm talking about averages of around 75 decibels, the limited power of the AP20 was not a consideration. It's only when average listening levels exceeded 80 decibels that I noticed that the sound hardened up, and it was clear that the AP20 was reaching its power limit reserves. When you have speakers and amplifiers that are able to time so well, a truly three-dimensional space can be laid out in front of you. That's what the Dali NVA combo delivered, with exquisite placement of performers. The Dayens Menuet Custom couldn't match the levels of resolution of the AP20 at most sensible levels that you're likely to play the little Dali speakers at. So round two goes to the NVA AP20. As for my reference amplifier, there's something special about the synergy of the Exposure 2510 and the Dali Menuet SEs. The amp provides a richness of tone without obvious coloration and just enough power to deliver effortless dynamics. Sounds a lot bigger and more in control of the Dalis, with almost the same clarity and precision in stereo imaging as the NVA amp. Exposure 2510 justifies the extra outlay over the Dayens Menuetto Custom and the NVA AP20 when it comes to pairing with the Dali Menuet SE speakers. One of my patrons has this exact system, so we'll be delighted to hear that. It was time to call upon my £1,500 Amphion Argon 1s. They may have an 86 dB sensitivity into an 8 ohm load, but they're also pretty forgiving of amplifiers that have limited power and drive, so this was going to be interesting. I've referred to listening levels a lot in this video because I think it's very relevant when you're talking about amplifiers that have modest power capabilities, less so perhaps with the Dayens, certainly more so with the NVA. But if you don't know what 60, 70, 80 or 90 dB sounds like, just download an app on your phone. It's what I used. It's not going to be as accurate as a calibrated mic, but it's fine for the purposes of getting an idea of your listening level. The NVA AP20 sounded clean and controlled with the Argon ones, even at average listening levels in the low 80s and peaks approaching 90 decibels. The Argon ones gave the AP20 a little bit more of an easier ride than the Monitor Audio Silver 100s. Clearly they're very easy speakers to drive. The Dayens Menuetto Custom also sounded great, but traded some of the NVA amps clarity for a little bit more rhythmic drive. Which one you'll prefer comes down to a matter of personal taste. For me it's the AP20 by a whisker, but others may disagree. Let's keep things real. Neither are going to replace my Exposure 2510 as a reference. More power sometimes translates into more clarity, usually translates into a bigger soundstage, but almost certainly translates into better dynamics and control. And that's what the Exposure 2510 with the Amphion Argon ones delivers. Finally, I hooked up the most resolving speakers I've reviewed to date under £3,000. The £1,800 Quad Revela ones also have a very balanced tonality. All three amplifiers that I've discussed today sounded okay, but I wouldn't choose any of them to run the quads. The NVA amp had the clarity but not the control. The Dayens amp had a little bit more control but not the clarity, and the exposure fared just a little bit better than the Dayens. You need to spend a bit more money if you want to hear the Quad Revela ones at their best. There's no shame in that for the amplifiers being reviewed here today. Everything has a ceiling to its performance, and the quads were just a bridge too far. Time to wrap things up. In the end, it all depends on what you get for your money. These are no-frills amplifiers with modest power. Neither of them come with built-in DACs. The NVA AP20 doesn't even come with a remote control, but what you get is much better quality internal components than you typically find on amplifiers in this class. Does that translate into better sound quality? Yes, as long as they've been designed correctly. For £1,100 you can buy an Audiolab 7000A. It's a very nice amplifier with 70 watts per channel into 8 ohms, backed up by a decent power supply. It will drive almost all the speakers that it's likely to be partnered with. You get a decent DAC thrown in as well. Sound-wise, it's a class below something like my Exposure 2510, whereas the NVA and Dayens amplifiers that I reviewed today feel like they belong in the same class. But in order to get the performance from them, you need to take a little bit more care than you would with something like an Audiolab 7000A. The Dayens Menuetto Custom is the easier of the two to get on with. For £1,350, it comes close to the performance of some of the best amplifiers I've heard below £2,000. Spend more and you'll get more. For £500 extra, the Exposure 2510 gives you more power and control, a little bit more detail and a larger soundstage, but the Dayens amplifier has a very similar sonic character and isn't that far behind in terms of performance. The Dayens Menuetto Custom gets a highly recommended from this channel. As for the NVA AP20, it's even more of a specialist piece of kit. For £1,200 in the right setup, it has a natural tonality and levels of clarity that I haven't heard from any other amplifier below £2,000. The right conditions, that's the key. It needs to be paired with speakers that are easy to drive. Also pick something with high sensitivity, and 35 watts per channel is going to be plenty. I didn't quite have the ideal speakers on this occasion, but I'm sure if those two conditions are met, it will surpass my Exposure 2510. For most people, this amplifier isn't recommended at all, but with the right speakers, it can sound sensational. The NVA AP20 gets a highly recommended from this channel. A couple of questions for today. Let me know what you think of this head-to-head format. It's a little bit more work, but I find it interesting and fun. Hopefully you do as well, but please let me know. Also let me know what you want from your amplification. I'm sure you know what to do if you want to support me on this channel. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon. There's a couple of tiers you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey. Also check out the ABA Club on Patreon for some great ways to interact with me and fellow Patreons. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.